Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I'm recording this on approximately 1:30 my time on Tuesday, June 17th, 2025. And, I don't really have anything completely prepared in my mind. I actually normally don't. I kind of just respond to what's going on in the moment where my mind is. And a lot of the times the delivery is impacted by how much I've got going on in my world. And I only bring that up to those of you who are new to this channel and welcome. And maybe you can recognize that I've got my No Kings hat on, Action Over Anxiety from Salt Lake City's Indivisible. And I received this because I was one of the speakers at the No Kings rally this Saturday that I'm going to delve into in a moment. But right now, like all of you, and I think that this call to action. I mean, I wear like my news boy hat. Can't remember what the exact name of it is. It's something that you would see from, Thomas Shelby and Peaky Blinders and that sort of thing, which is kind of my go-to look as a result of me being a muckraker journalist. And my name is Patrick Lovell, and I'm a producer, and I've got the $71 trillion truth that's led to the Clean New Deal because of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in the history of the world that never ended and created the world that we're in. That led me to engineering, architecting this notion of what we can do to move forward and turn the tables on the misery of tyranny to unleash the renaissance of possibility, which we call the Clean New Deal. And so I guess right off the top, I'll just introduce or reintroduce, particularly if you're new to this channel, because I just happened to speak in front of about 10,000 people on Saturday, and which was unbelievable. And what I had to say resonated. Now, I'm going to take a quick look here. It resonated in a giant way, as a matter of fact. But I'm going to look, because I didn't say this at the outset, but on my YouTube page, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, I'm just curious to see how many truth bombs I'm up to, because it is pretty important for everybody to understand how long I've been in the trenches of this on my righteous grind. I think I'm entering year 4 on this effort on Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. And it says here that I've recorded 609 videos. I'm up to 2,070 subscribers, which is fabulous. But the information I have literally should be, you know, second nature now for literally tens of millions of Americans. And I've always had a theory that, you know, if I could just penetrate the Borg, if I could just pierce the atmosphere to people's consciousness, that the information I have would suddenly plug in to where everyone would be like, oh my God, this is the guy who's got the information that I've been looking for. Now, that actually happened on Saturday. And it was extraordinary in so many ways. And I really want to tell the story of how this all came to be. But before I get into it, I just want to acknowledge what everybody else is in the midst of. We're in absolute chaos, insanity. And the stuff that's going on between last week that took place in Southern California as a result of ICE agents that were then met with protesters in Los Angeles, that was pretty much, reserved for a relatively small area, but that then led to, of course, Stephen Miller's influence with Donald Trump that would lead to calling the National Guard and Marines. And that happened last week. Of course, in front of it, that would lead to, among other things, a couple of really insane and very horrible outcomes. The first, California Senator Alex Padilla was arrested, obviously, trying to question Homeland Security Chief, Kristi Noems, who's just a complete Barbie moron. And for the first time in history, a senator was arrested under, well, for the first time in history. Enough said. Period. Exclamation point. There's nothing else to carry on about that. But the nature of it just shocked a lot of people. And then, of course, this on top of, further escalation of bringing in the Marines. All of this stuff is in complete contradiction to constitutional protocol based on the Posse Comitatus Act and other things that had been, obviously leveled against the Constitution now for the entirety of the Trump administration so far. That includes, of course, basically throwing habeas corpus and due process in the garbage, and that's what makes the United States the United States. So that was bubbling up, just this, outrage and fomentation of a resistance that would then, for the second time in 3 months, lead to what's known as, well, it was initially the 50-51 rallies and hands off that then evolved into the No Kings rally. And of course, on Saturday, Donald Trump threw himself what looks like, in retrospect, literally the worst Mad Magazine, National Lampoon, Circus, uh, Monty Python, Flying Circus uh, parade for himself that was just glorious to look at in retrospect, given all of the activity that took place on Saturday. And he looked miserable. The performance of the troops appeared to be really not tight, not very impressive. And a lot of people are speculating that the military did that on purpose, which would be fabulous. And I could see that actually in a kind of a Stripes way. What was the thing that Bill Murray said back in the day? Anyway, it'll probably come to me as I'm going through it, because I would have been funny to say that. I love that movie Stripes, by the way. And but it was a joke. It was a joke. I think we saw, for example, Secretary of State, who's a joke in his own right, Marco Rubio, falling asleep. And I think Trump fell asleep. And I think we saw Melania, not wanting to touch his hand, again, in another one of these absolutely humiliating, embarrassing, just wipeouts of a country that was once a superpower for most of my life, that just looks like a joke. And it is a joke. It's a joke beyond comprehension joke. And yet millions of people came to the streets. Thank God. I think I saw, and I think it's incredible for those of you who follow me, as it turns out, it looks like 13 million people came to the streets. That's at least what the 50501 memes were saying. I've heard numbers between 5 million and 13 million. But for those of who know me, know that 13 is a big, significant number in my journey. And yes, I'm on my 13th year of this incredible odyssey that's revealing all of the elements of what I'm revealing to you. And I have been for 600 now. This is my 10th truth bomb. That in this effort, which was extraordinary, I just decided to hit record one day on my computer because I couldn't penetrate this Borg. I'm the producer of a television series, an investigative television series called The Con, that you can find and watch for free at www.thecon.tv. And in that effort, what I did with my colleagues, and particularly I want to mention my colleague and my brother, and a guy who's launched a wonderful podcast that you can find also on YouTube called Corruption Incorporated, and I'll include that in the link in the discovery down below. But his name is Eric Vaughn, and he and I, with the help or support of a gentleman by the name of Adam Bronfman, decided to set sail on this adventure literally 13 years ago that would ultimately encompass everything that the entirety of government, the entirety of media, the entirety of just about every aspect of power and reflection, even through universities, or let's call it, law enforcement to a degree, failed to present, which has created everything that is now. And again, it's action over anxiety. And that's what I've been doing the entire time. Now, I've never been a weak person or a coward. I've always been a very aggressive and assertive person, and a very plugged in person, and a person who believes with everything that I am in the ideals of the American experiment, i.e., liberty and justice for all, predicated on the integrity of law. That has always been my come from. And so ultimately, many years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, is when we kind of launched it. We're in the fifth year, but we dropped our work, The Con, to www.thecon.tv, which is free, which is the blueprint of the largest criminal conspiracy in the history of the world, but that never ended. To be honest with you, the first 5 episodes of our work, which show you how this whole thing works, that's led to the nightmare disaster that we're in, that nobody else ever revealed, because the entirety system of power that is absolutely corrupt buried this information so that nobody could see the forest for the trees. And as a result, it's created a contagion of insanity. And look around as of last week. I started, I think I left off with Alex Padilla being tackled. And while Kristi Noem, the Barbie Secretary of Homeland Security, who's a complete buffoon, doesn't even know the bare essence of the Constitution. I believe it was like 4 months ago when someone asked her, what, I can't remember the framing of the question, but her response was such that no, Donald Trump's first order of responsibility isn't to the Constitution. And of course, that just undergirds the idiocracy that we're in the midst of, that Barbie Nazi, if we want to call her that, even though I wouldn't go that far because she's just a freaking buffoon, like everybody else in the Trump Kennedy, cabinet. In fact, I saw, and this is a very important sort of um, parallel that, during No Kings and also in the previous 50-51 march and the hands-off protest, the brilliance has been in the signs. The brilliance has been in it's millions of creative people that have incredible things to say that put them on these signs. And I remember back in April 5th, which was the first hands-off rally that I had attended, looking in the sea of these signs, and they were all asking questions that I'm resolving for you. I felt like I was suspended in animation. It was one of the most glorious things that I can really put my finger on, because as I'm meandering through the stream of consciousness, please bear with me because this will all come full circle. But as I've said in many of these, for those of you who've watched these forever, that for me personally, these truth bombs are part therapy, part lecture, and part sermon, really, depending on my mood and where I am, because that's how insane everything is, right? But yet, nobody can verbalize and articulate exactly how this thing works except for on the signs. It reminds me of that songs from the 70s. Signs, signs, everywhere, signs. Don't do this, do that. Can't you read the signs? Remember that song? It's kind of like that, but even more so because the creativity has basically expressed the voice and the frustration of the American people to ask the question, how is it possible that we're in the moment, in this situation, where we have an idiot that's become a president with a Supreme Court that effectively named him a king, that is brutalizing the Constitution of the American people. And quite frankly, we all understand that it could be monumentally worse, even though it's ridiculous at the moment, if he wasn't so incompetent. And by he, I mean Trump. And again, the juxtaposition between the 13 million plus people that came to the streets to protest No Kings A proves that we all understand that a vast majority of us, and I'm sure that we are the vast majority, and maybe even the silent majority, if you want to call it that, to some degree, even though 13 million of us are not being silent, but those that are on the fence and, looking around, most of us want democracy and the law and freedom and liberty and an ability to be dynamic and to live your own life and everything else. But a lot of people just don't have the compunction or the knowledge or the awareness of how things work, and their understanding of power is literally nothing. They don't understand anything further than the four walls of their existence, so they don't ask questions. Who knows what their education level is? I think most of us understand that for decades that critical thought in the United States has practically been murdered and then destroyed and further smothered, if you will, by too much of this, particularly for our younger people who are hooked on this like it's freaking heroin, and they go through the doom loop. And there's so much misinformation and so much manipulation, and there's so much that happens in the tech bro apparatus of these oligarchies of these platforms that are simply propaganda. And so nobody can see the forest for the trees. And so here I was with all of this background, with all of this information, and much more than I've been able to verbalize at the moment. But I was caught up in this groundswell, really going back to, several years ago after we launched the con, our work that coincided with, the J6 insurrection. And we got smothered. But I can tell you that the people that were paying attention to what we were revealing were the people that pulled off the J6 insurrection. I've said it publicly and I'll say it again. Well, 99.99% of the United States doesn't know who Patrick Lovell is. Steve Bannon does. So does Elon Musk. So does really pretty much everybody who's in power and behind the billionaire apparatus and all of their, you know, uh, demons that are, engineering this insanity. They all know who Patrick Lovell is. And I'll tell you, one of the telltale signs was, and you can actually do your own due diligence on this. Our poster for our work, The Con, it says, "We were all sold a lie." Our distributor, an outfit by the name of Abramarama, designed that. And I always thought when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, that is so bold, but yet it is so on the money. Shazam, brilliant. This guy in a suit holding a briefcase with no head, kind of, obscured, but holding his tie and the briefcase, looking very businesslike, with the caption, "We were all sold a lie." And I think it says, "The truth of the largest criminal conspiracy in history," which is exactly what we delivered. But like I said, however long ago in this truth bomb, it was only half of what I've got. And so because we got quashed, because the wheels of my world, my family, and my business, and what I do as an independent producer, and all of those things, literally came off. Everything, the wheels fell off the train, right? And I just had a complete train wreck because everything that happened to the whistleblowers that I had revealed in our work, The Con, that I kept asking questions like, how is it possible nobody understands who Dick Bowen is? How is it possible? And most people, I think I could go and I could ask 1,000 people, and maybe 999 of them wouldn't know who William K. Black is, or Michael Winston, and many, many others that we showcase in The Con, once again at thecon.tv, considering that they're all pieces of a revelation that created this damn insane nightmare that we're in the middle of. How? Well, everybody knows that we're corrupt. And people have been saying forever that the system's rigged. But what nobody knows is they don't know how to put A plus B plus C equals D together, because A, they're not paid to. They don't see it through the four corners of their universe or what's being manipulated and grifted to them. So they're lost in translation. And they don't know. It's like when you serve the truth to the American people right now, and I've said this, and it really, really frustrates and angers several of you, because you've told me this on the comment section below. I say that we made the truth free because all the American people buy our lies. And I use the metaphor frequently. One of my favorite scenes in my favorite television series of all time, Game of Thrones, where Jon Snow gives that, momentous speech in King's Landing after he had to not bend the knee to Cersei because he had already bent the knee to, Daenerys Targaryen, and everybody was questioning him after the fact of why he didn't lie, because he could have saved so many lives if he had. And he said, when all people do is falsehoods, all we get are better and better lies, and words stop meaning anything, which means nothing means anything. And yeah, boy, was that poetic, because that's exactly what we've been living in for at least 14 years, maybe 15, but maybe going back 25 years, if you want to know the truth. And I bet I should probably kind of qualify that because of what we're in the midst of this insanity now. So let's continue the through line of all of the elements that led up to No Kings this last week. I got up to the ridiculous, Monty Python flying circus of the Trump, baby presidency, and a sandbox crying in his diaper Don, and all of those things that we can make fun of him on. But it was literally happening in the most monumental way. Not to mention he's surrounded by Pete Hegseth, this buffoon crusader who is Secretary of the Department of Defense because he was on Fox, and he's what, a drunk freaking guilty of all sorts of different degrees of sexual harassment, or however that gets qualified. And in the midst of all of this other shit that was going on, considering that you have the trial of Harvey Weinstein last week, and you have the trial of P. Diddy, that kind of underscores all of this stuff in a metaphorical way that leads us to millions of people coming to the streets to say we're no kings. with all the signs asking for the truth. And yet here I was, I got the opportunity to address my local No Kings rally. And again, why I'm wearing the hat, because of a lot of things that took place to lead to that. But this woman named Sarah, who runs the Indivisible local chapter, I had approached her because I met her, in one of the marches about a month and a half ago. I introduced myself, who I am, what I have access to, and everything else. And she was very intrigued, and we started a conversation. And one thing led to another. She asked me to give a speech. And then I found out that she asked me to close the speech. And I was like, wow, this is freaking amazing. So I got to test case my theory that what happens when I get beyond the algorithm and in the moment tell thousands of people what it is that I have to tell them. It was magic. And what I had to tell them wasn't exactly all the stuff that I usually do on these truth bombs, and I'll tell you why. So for those of you who follow the truth bombs, you realize I've done the con.tv, which led to a podcast called The New Untouchables, because I was quashed by the Borg of media that's run by the billionaires, that's run by the guys that basically were the behind the door of what took place that I reveal that nobody else does, that enabled them to basically buy the world, pick winners and losers, which is the antithesis of capitalism. Because as I've mentioned many times, we're not a capitalist nation, nor we are a democracy. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. Yeah, that's what we are, if you could follow that bouncing ball. And ultimately, I've been saying that the whole time because of the con is the revelation of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended. But we only got the first 5 episodes, which is 50% of what I have, which led me to do what's known as the New Untouchables, which is a podcast that reveals to anybody watching the largest revelation with the actual receipts of the evidence and the whistleblowers and the people that were there to reveal who did what, when, and how, to answer that question I posed before, that, yeah, we are in fact rigged and corrupt, which then leads to the ultimate revelation that we floated the financial systems, which were a global racketeering ring that ended up getting floated tens of trillions of dollars illegally. That, of course, has created this mess. And what I mean by that is that when the law is cherry picked, when the law is different for those above the line than it is for everybody else, you can't have integrity of the system. And you're going to wind up in a situation where a 34 count felony fraud con artist who has been breaking the law for decades, who's a buffoon, an idiot beyond comprehension, who was involved with organized crime going back to the 70s, would wind up as the president of the United States, even though many of us are still asking questions and know that, for example, yeah, the swing states practice in subordination and quashing votes in the Jim Crow states using the same sort of techniques. And yeah, the difference there was 3.5 million, which would have swung the election for Kamala. And yeah, I was all in on Kamala and Tim Walz. And sorry for Tim Walz, because that's the other aspect of just happened because of Minnesota. Because as I had said earlier today, we had, of course, a judge arrested based on what was going on with ICE in Wisconsin, as you recall, about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. And then we ended up with a senator arrested. And then you ended up with a state representative in Minnesota being assassinated with her husband. Both of them were killed. And then you've got the Marines and the National Guard coming out for something that was illegal based on what the Constitution says. And all of these things paint the picture that, yeah, we are indeed a authoritarian, tyrannical, fascist dictatorship. And then, of course, the guy who's at the, flying the plane isn't flying the plane. He's getting a free one from UAE against, obviously, the Constitution, again, because of the nature of the emoluments clause and everything else. The Constitution is bullshit. And again, I said this in front of the 10,000 people that effectively, and I didn't say it this kind of gross, but MAGA and Trump is using the Constitution as toilet paper. And I literally asked the question, are you kidding me? And I said this to 10,000 people. I said, Are we literally going to listen to this buffoon decry and promulgate that this guy is about law and order? You should have heard the eruption of the crowd. In fact, I'll try to find a link and find a way to get an upload a link of my speech, and I'll put it in the description below. People were like going crazy because they were like, this is just insane. Absolutely insanity, right? Okay, so I get us through all of those horrible elements, and I give this speech, and I give this speech that I'm going to kind of touchstone upon all of the key ingredients of, but I want to get this thing in first because of all the stuff that's going on. So I was invited. That was during the day. I was scheduled, I think at 11:30 is when I landed, and I think I spoke for 15 minutes, even though I was scheduled for 10. Went swimmingly well. I was descended upon by people left and right after the fact going, oh my God, are you kidding me? Because to my theory that I've been doing for 600 and now 10 truth bombs, I've been saying, if I can only connect with people where they weren't log jammed by the algorithm and they could see the forest for the trees and they could hear what I had to say, and they in the context of what was going on, it was like the Red Sea parted, the clouds parted, the light was there, and you could hear the angels singing. It was magnificent because it proved what I've been saying the whole time, that people are desperate for the truth. And I give them a lot of it, a piece of it, and a really great ground game and game plan based on everything that I've been doing that I have to introduce to you what we're going through and why I hit record on this whole thing. So later on that afternoon, well, right afterwards, in addition to all of these people, including personnel from the University of Utah Law School and others going, okay, we want to hook up with you. We want to sync. We love the plan. And it just blew up. And I've been getting, people reaching out to me. So it's far surpassed my hopes, quite frankly, and my dreams, which is incredible. It makes me a happy camper in the midst of all this madness, because what I'm about to discuss is a very sad event that, isn't nationally known to the level that it should be. And I'll touch down upon that. So later that evening at 6 o'clock, there was a rally that was scheduled to be downtown. Now, it wasn't part of Indivisible. It was part of what we call the 50501. They split in terms of the organization. Maybe it was divide and conquer in a way to get more and more people out. And it really worked, because in my city, more people came out to march in this No Kings march than anything I've ever seen in this state, and really anywhere outside of Washington, D.C., on camera for the Civil Rights March. I mean, there must have been, I believe there was 30,000 people, which is huge for what we're talking about. And so this giant caterpillar, let's call it, of people in this march, saying all of those wonderful things like, this is what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. And this one I like a lot too, by the way. No ICE, no KKK, no fascist USA. No ICE, no KKK, no fascist USA. That really were like the birds singing in my ears, because I've been saying all along, with all of this information that I've been conveying to everybody that's been listening, and hopefully millions and more that we'll hear soon, that corruption births and fuels fascism. So to see the signs and see the anti-fascist signs and the anti-corruption signs and the villains and all of the things, and then the speeches, it's like, yes, we're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. And it was amazing, because they had invited me to come speak at this event, or at least somebody who saw me earlier. But the way it worked out was we were all in this march, and then we were supposed to go back, and I think we're going to have more speeches. But all of a sudden, about 3/4 of the way through, something really got weird. And I noticed that there was like this just panic attack where people began to start running. And I was like, okay, looking around, expecting it actually to be ICE or maybe the National Guard or something, where they were going to throw tear gas and everything else. And I was kind of preparing for that. But one thing led to another. It turned out there was a shooting incident. And the shooting incident, I'm going to say, because I want to get the name right. Hold on a second. Because I was literally standing across the street when this whole thing happened. Okay. And, interesting. They actually, how about this? Finally, and I don't know where this appeared because I read the New York Times daily, but this link popped up on the New York Times. So somebody in mainstream media covered it, and that's important because of what I'm about to say. But there was a shooting. There was a strange crossfire incident. It looked like one guy, some people who were supposedly designated as peacekeepers, which is very peculiar for anybody who knew Black Lives Matter. You might remember that there were unmarked vans and guys behind masks that represented what we might think of ICE now. That I believe that may have been connected to Blackwater. Kind of these mercenary guys that have been serving in Iraq and all over the world that, through the, 20 plus years of war on terror wound up, working as deputized or deputies during the Black Lives Matter movement. And, they were, I think, called peacekeepers or whatever. But, the strange thing back then that I said, and this was like at the 2019-ish, right? The last year of Trump's presidency. I'm like, oh my God, we've gotten to a point where returned mercenaries working for Blackwater, the billionaire apparatus on the open market, and these guys are probably heavily trained, heavily armed with a lot of assets and backing and everything else, are like on the streets of America with the attorney general at that time, basically deputizing them. So I was aware of that then. This was all before Kyle Rittenhouse and all of that type of stuff and the insanity that took place in Portland, as you guys may recall. But ultimately, we have these peacekeepers that were in position to apparently help or assist the police, and maybe they were designated by the 50501 movement. I'm not exactly sure on that. So I'm just speculating about who and how these guys were. But apparently there was this guy who was this, maybe his mind was a little off kilter. He was described as some sort of punk rocker in Salt Lake City. And he was open carry because we have open carry in the state, right? And somehow, I guess he may have been waving his gun, and some of the peacekeepers decided to respond, and some shots were, fired. And in the melee of the whole thing, this guy by the name of Arthur Falusa Alu, a 39-year-old Samoan-born fashion designer, was shot and killed. And the reason I think it's so important to say his name, just like Black Lives Matter, say his name, Arthur Falusa, sorry if I mispronounced that to my Samoan friends out there, Folasa Alu. Say his name. Utah is a very conservative state, but I've been here off and on for a very long time, and we have very progressive elements. And that's happened everywhere I've ever been where there's a super conservative, sort of majority. There's always a very loud minority. And same with Orange County, California, really the home of American punk rock, or I should say the birthplace. In places like Texas and, in Utah and so on and so forth, Arizona, same kind of stuff. And, this guy apparently had an open carry permit and, like all of the MAGAs, was not afraid to bring his weapon and somehow got into a crossfire, or at least he was shot at by these so-called peacekeepers. And in the turmoil, this innocent victim, Arthur Folasa Alu, was shot and later died. It's incredibly sad. And I wanted to bring that up in this context because last night I was watching both Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell. And true to form, Rachel Maddow was, of course, promoting and celebrating all of the No Kings protests and showing the contradiction between Trump's ridiculous, and failure of a parade in Washington, D.C. It was so much fun to mock. And of course, predictably, she was doing that. But on the April 5th event, I do recall specifically that Rachel Maddow had showcased Salt Lake City as part of, and Boise, Idaho, with emphasis to say, look, there's even resistance in red states, because that was important for her and her role. Okay. Don't want to go into too much analysis about that. Those of you who've watched me know what my position on Miss Maddow is. But, and I'm a big fan of Lawrence O'Donnell. But then she goes into the tragedy of what took place in Minnesota. This other insane gunman who shot down the Democratic representative and her husband. Both of them died, and then two other people were injured, and I apologize. I don't have their names in front of me, and I should probably read their names. But I just, They were shot, they were killed. It's extremely important. But the connection here is that both Rachel and Lawrence were beside themselves that Senator Mike Lee of Utah had the gall to infer that it was a leftist that murdered them. Typical MAGA response, typical, conspiracy bullshit and the kind of stuff that goes rampant online because of all the liars that buy all this crap and it's packaged in X. And when you watch X is nothing but a propaganda insane machine and so on and so forth. And, here they were talking about it specifically, and there was no connection to the 30,000 plus people that showed up for the No Kings rally, of which tens of thousands that I experienced and I chanted with were saying, fuck Mike Lee. Now, I've kind of gone back and forth online with some people today about, my position on this, but if it was news that Mike Lee had said something so ridiculous and insulting and horrific, considering his position as a senator in support of, creating lies and deception and confusion in the marketplace when this senator, this innocent woman, was literally targeted and shot. So think about the continuity here, right? So several months ago, we have a judge that's arrested. Then we have all the things that I had mentioned about, the protests with ICE and what we saw before with ICE in Oklahoma City, going after American citizens, literally without due process or habeas corpus, taking people like, and I guess we're going to see the trial soon of, Kilmar Abrego Garcia and everything that goes with that, and supposedly trumped up charges of what's coming in from Pam Bondi's DOJ. And yeah, there's so much stuff, but the relevance is that, yes, Utah was like never before hugely supportive of the No Kings. And yes, it's a conservative state, but there is such a huge population of people who are just the opposite. And I would imagine many conservative people came in support of No Kings as well. I'm absolutely certain of it. But then we have this guy that gets killed and no mention of it. None. No mention of it. But people are speculating on my thread earlier today. They're kind of like, well, maybe they just didn't want to send, a fear message to people because they want people to keep coming to the streets and they want people to keep protesting and they want to build this groundswell and this momentum and this anti-Trumpism and everything that's going on. So maybe they didn't want to mention the fact that somebody had the courage, thousands of us had the courage to show up and literally gave their lives for No Kings. That's who Arthur Folasa Alu did. He gave his life to No Kings and no mention of it. So that disgusts me personally. No, you don't hide information, especially if it's relevant and it's news. And the reason I say that is because for those of you who have been watching me the whole time, realize that I've been providing the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended, that the likes of Rachel Maddow never touched. Why? Because they're covering up for their side of the grift, which is corruption. And what I'm telling you is corruption is what burrs and fuels fascism, and corruption is what has a complete control. And corruption isn't just Donald Trump. It's the whole system that enabled Donald Trump. In fact, my theory has always been that a criminal like Donald Trump, who's a joke, that, guys like, who was the CEO, Les Moonves of, Paramount, actually of CBS, he said, as did Jeffrey Zucker, the guy who was the president of CNN, Trump is good for ratings. Psh, who cares about democracy? Who cares about the truth? Who cares about, he's good for ratings. They played roulette with our democracy because of ratings. And media has been doing this nonstop. That's why I had to make the con. What I found in the con was that tens of millions of people were set up in a massive corporate grift that spanned the globe, that took in a $4.5 trillion housing market, turned it into a $900 trillion global calamity. And when the whole thing blew up, instead of the law coming in and taking out the grifters and the racketeers that actually enabled the whole thing, that are literal, criminal enterprises, the government didn't take them down. The government said, oh, yeah, everything I'm telling you. But they said, we refer the right to take them down at a later date, but we're not going to do that because nobody can pay attention for more than, 2 days, and nobody has any bandwidth because you're just trying to survive for the most part. That's not an excuse, but that's what millions of people do. And they don't know how the system works. But they're really quick to judge everybody else, aren't they? They're really quick to say, yeah, the whole thing is corrupt. Everybody's rigged. But they don't know who did what, when, and how. And I've been giving that information nonstop for free that leads you to ultimately the answer for all of this stuff, which is the Clean New Deal. But the reason why, and you can find that at thecleannewdeal.org, but the reason why I had a chance to speak at the No Kings rally is because for those of you who've been following me, you know that on occasion, and it's been very I should say consistent as of the last 3 months. On Friday, I do a recording, which I call the New Untouchables, which features the whistleblowers and the prosecutors and the experts that have been taking down corruption, really for the last 30 years. So William K. Black, who I regard as the Michael Jordan of criminology, took down with his team, but he had I got to say this, by the way, he had $100 million budget. I found out not too long ago, $150 million budget back in the 80s to do this. Yeah, that's pretty extraordinary. But that was the government's commitment to root out this bank fraud that he figured out how the whole thing worked. And I learned from him. And ultimately, it's insane corruption. Okay. It's called control fraud. So William K. Black is one piece of the New Untouchables, as is this guy, Paul Peltier, who worked for decades at the Department of Justice. And he took down Enron and WorldCom and the world's largest healthcare fraud. And before that, he was taking down La Cosa Nostra and all the money laundering and drug laundering and dealing and everything else in Miami. And, he's one of the America's best of all time. And then there's June Carbone, who is the wife of William K. Black, but she's an unbelievable, prestigious expert in the law who was like magna cum laude or summa cum laude at Princeton Law School and Princeton Law, Yale Law, and Princeton. Well, yeah, she was Princeton and Yale, and then at Stanford and everything else. And now she's the Rabina Chair of Science and Technology and Law at the University of Minnesota. And she's one of the New Untouchables because she's an expert in all things corporate fraud, including tech bro fraud. I don't know if there's really, quite frankly, anybody more knowledgeable about what's going on than June Carbone. So she's now part of the New Untouchables, which is extraordinary, as is a gentleman by the name of Mark Dan. Mark Dan, the state attorney, the former state attorney of Ohio, Attorney General of Ohio, who was the only guy in the country that got a RICO conviction of a relatively large mid-level player, was like $60 to $80 million fraud that they brought down the RICO convictions on. But it was the exact same story that the entirety of our financial system was involved with that blew up the world. That Eric Holder's Department of Justice had the information, but they sat on it, similar to Lawrence O'Donnell and Rachel Maddow sitting on this information, which I just, displayed or exemplified based on, what happened on Saturday with the No Kings. And, obfuscation is a form of lying. It's deception. If you don't tell the truth, the opposite of not telling the truth is allowing the lie to breathe. And so, again, going back to the con, which says, we were all sold a lie. And I told you that Steve Bannon, it was very well of our work because that's what they advertised during January 6th. They perverted the whole thing because the entirety of Trump and this wing of the MAGA circus, their entire calculus is to lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. They're liars, they're grifters, they're cheaters, they're rapists, they're scumbag criminals, and they're in control. Which is why we have no kings in the midst of all this other calamity and tragedy that's going on. And so, yeah, yours truly had the opportunity to give this amazing speech in front of approximately 8,000 to 10,000 people, where literally the blinds went up, the blind masks or whatever you put around somebody's eyes so that they can't see, the blindfolds were lifted up, and they were like, oh my God. And what did we do? What did I do? Well, I worked with all of those guys to create a speech and a platform that's going to turn the tables on this insanity, which is all complete illegality and unconstitutionality of the executive orders through Doge and all of this insane tech bro insanity that is inside the back end of the Treasury, stealing information, destroying Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare and Veterans Administration and all of the things that make the United States, quite frankly, great. As a decent society of law and helping people who fall through the cracks to help them, while at the same time allowing the freedom and dynamism for people to do well in society. That's kind of the idea. We're a huge society where you have a hybrid where things can happen a lot of different ways. But, because of the MAGA movement and because of the final nail in the death nail in the coffin of democracy is fascism that's brought on by corruption. And we all know it. And what I'm showing you is the way out of this, because we've already created the Clean New Deal. But in this particular case, the new untouchables are going to provide pro bono an apparatus that's going to do things, for example, with a whole litany of law firms that are working in conjunction to be able to provide counsel in every law available under the Constitution to protect those who are victimized by ICE or any of this other insanity of overreach by the Trump administration through DOGE and everything else that leads to the likes of small businesses getting crushed by tariffs, which are unconstitutional. But then on top of that, we're going to turn the tables and we're going to create an impetus to go after Section 230 of this law that it basically protects propaganda for the likes of the billionaire class through platforms like X, which manipulate and nobody can see the forest for the trees. So when a guy like me gets in front of everybody with all of the information I have, they're like, where did this guy come from? Yeah. And can you please like and share and subscribe and make this thing go, nuclear? Because we got to get the information out to everybody, because I have created a new, myself and Roseanne Rabiola Mile and Tosh and people that are involved with our organization on our side have created a new standalone YouTube page for the new Untouchables, where every week we're going to provide not just an insight into what the vision and the execution is, but hopefully through millions of you, be able to find cases of people that I just described, that we tell their stories and we bring weekly updates to this whole thing that gives you stories that you're not going to get in mainstream media. You're not going to get it on Colbert. I can guarantee you that. You're not going to get it on Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell, because that's not their focus. Their focus is whatever the DNC is involved with, because that's kind of the old school mentality. And, maybe every once in a while Bernie Sanders, and that's even a stretch for them, right? That's not the resistance, even though, of course, Rachel Maddow is promoting the resistance. What they're promoting is anything not Donald Trump. They're not paradigm changers against the entire universe of corruption. They don't even acknowledge the corruption. I mean, they did, with Lawrence Tribe and, Weissman and some of these great, legal experts, with regards to the Supreme Court prior to the election, particularly as it related to Section 14, the 14th Amendment, Section 3 in the Constitution, which, of course, is no kings, if you want to know the truth. And they turned it around and etch-a-sketched American history because they're corrupt. Yes, the Supreme Court is corrupt, as is Congress, as is our media, as is the American soul, which is really the theme of my speech, where I revealed that we're going to turn the tables in a massive way and flood the zone in a way that's going to upend this insanity of these idiots that are represented by this billionaire technocracy that's involved with and fomented with Project 2025 and Russell Vogt and Steve Bannon and the Koch brother apparatus, even though they both passed away, but their money still lives, unfortunately, in this particular case, not to mention Sheldon Adelson and all of the other billionaire foundations that are involved with, the likes of Leonard Leo and the $1.6 billion backdoor channel to the Supreme Court that completely corrupted the United States. Who did what, when, how, and where? I've got those answers, all of them. And now a vehicle to where you can set the sails and we can, bulldoze the misery of tyranny to unleash the renaissance of possibility. Because, again, we're going to go after, picking up where I left off, Section 230 that basically indemnifies these billionaire propaganda people that are destroying the world and putting people who don't understand how things work into the doom loop to where all they do is buy lies. And yeah, I got to tell that to the American people to their face, and they were electrified. Now, somehow we've got to get this information to millions of more people because a part of this, platform is we've got to get state legislatures to sue Elon Musk, subpoena Elon Musk. Why? Because the Supreme Court created this high bar that, well, you can't have quid pro quo, so corruption's not legal, hint, infer, but you've got to prove these things. Where's the intent? Well, what did we see last week before all of this insanity with the National Guard in San Diego and LA and Minneapolis and New Jersey and Salt Lake City that led to all of the things that I've talked about, from Padilla to, obviously the senator in Minnesota being killed, to this young guy in Salt Lake City who was just, in the wrong place at the wrong time, who gave his life, for no kings, which hopefully the shot heard around the world. But in addition to all of that, which is going to take millions of us, because we've got to get these cases, we've got to be able to not promote, but bring eyeballs to understand what we're doing, how and why, to break the Borg of corruption, to be able to use the channels of the Constitution in the justice system that's outside of the purview of the Department of Justice. Because the Department of Justice, which would be doing this on behalf of the American people if it wasn't corrupt. And yeah, Pam Bondi is absolutely corrupt, as is the FBI. The whole country is beyond corrupt. And not a moment too soon, as we're going to turn our attention to potentially having a bunker buster drop from B-52s onto the nuclear installation in Iran, which maybe elevates the next level of, what's been going on in Israel and everything that I just don't have enough time or bandwidth or energy to be able to fully digest and give you my full opinion on how all of that stuff is working out. But I'd say it's par for the course. It's like the last 25 years of a nonstop World War III that nobody seems to understand is literally World War III. Not to mention what's coming next because of all the stuff that Trump's administration has been doing by way of gutting the regulations that ensure clean water and the Clean Air and Water Act, that sort of thing, and drill baby drill, and the backdoor of the calamity of corruption and everything else in the midst of another theater of war and everything that constitutes, with all of the other tragic stuff that's going on. And so I guess to not qualify, but maybe to bring this to a close, because I could go on for hours and hours and hours. And if you want more, I can assure you I've got hundreds of videos, but I just wanted to give you all of this information to make you guys aware that we're going to launch the new Untouchables that has its own new YouTube channel. And if you're just now discovering this, you can go, and I'm putting up all of the videos that I have on Patrick Level's Truth Bombs the Con that are the new Untouchables that will stand alone on the new Untouchables. So it's in process. I can't do more than X amount of uploads a day. For whatever reason, YouTube limits that. So it's in process. And we're launching a new Untouchables Substack page. And we'll see other elements of the new Untouchables with a new website that will build this entire platform, as well as Instagram and some of the others. And this is going to be working in collusion, kind of in a broader branding strategy way, with my friend and my colleague Eric Vaughn. He's got his platform, which I highly encourage you to check out, which is Corruption Incorporated, The American Way, and that's on YouTube as well as Instagram, and some of the others. I can't remember where else, but you just have to look, on YouTube, and you can find your way there. But I guess in conclusion, and I'll probably turn this off and think to myself, geez, there was so much more I could have said. But thank you for being here if you've lasted this long. And hopefully I haven't scrambled your brain so much that you're like, okay, where am I in this conversation? Because I kind of feel like that myself, and I've got a lot to do. But you just have to understand, guys, that it's all happening now. Everything I've been trying to warn you about, that when you let criminals run amok and you take the cops off the beat, the criminals take over. That's what we've done. And I am absolutely convinced that there are more good people in the United States than bad. But I do believe that a lot of people are inactive, They don't know what to do. They're overwhelmed. They don't have any answers. They don't have any orientation. They feel lost in translation. And I will say this to those of you who are like that. You're the one who gave up the democracy that millions of people throughout the history of the United States sacrificed their lives for you to have, for you to be so pathetic and cowardly that you would just literally have the audacity to act as if your citizenship doesn't matter, that you can't be bothered. Because what, you've got too much else to do? Well, how's that going to work out, when you get shot accidentally, or they take your company, or they throw you in prison without any, due process, or they, basically throw you in a death camp in a place like El Salvador without habeas corpus, and you wish that somebody would come save you then, but you certainly weren't up to the task, you know, in advance of that. So if nothing matters to you, do you matter? It's rhetorical, and the answer is self-evident. Let me tell you something. This poor guy, Arthur Filosa Alu, mattered. The fact that he died doing something that millions of us were involved with and was caught in the crossfire, and all of the others, the senator from Minnesota, and everything that's to come. It's a tragedy, but they're heroes for just being there and doing the right thing. And millions of more of us have to do the right thing. But I can assure you, without knowledge, you have no power. Knowledge is power. The truth is power. And I always finish off with this. And I deliver this, guys, for those of you who have watched my truth bombs before. And it really landed. Oh God, it landed so hard and strong. I'm very proud of just really being in the midst of it all. It was just extraordinary experience, and I hope it just foments and grows in monumental ways. We are American heroes, and I put myself in that category because I've been on this righteous grind forever. And yeah, if you're going to compare me to anybody, literally, it's like, honestly, it's Indiana Jones in that picture, of the lost ark and fighting Nazis, because I've always been telling the American people, everyone else is digging in the wrong place. The Ark of the Covenant, the Ark and Stone, the Holy Grail, the Rosetta Stone, any of those like mythical sort of things that encompass everything that reveals the truth. That's what I'm handing to you on a platinum platter. It's the truth. So, and I said this, and I'm going to close with this, which really was amazing to say this to the American people in front of their face. Look, if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in liberty and dignity and decency and beauty and sustainability and equality, if we join in unity to find each other and the clean New Deal, that is our destiny, to purge the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility. That the universal truth, my friends, no matter how you carve it up in your ideology and everything else, the universal construct, and we know this through physics and cosmology and the rest, is that, yeah, there is darkness. There is darkness, and it envelops everything. But the light, when it finds the energy and it becomes that supernova, it blasts through the darkness. Because when you live in truth, you live in light. When you live a lie, you're depraved. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. When you live a lie, inside you die. Stop lying. Stop buying lies. Become a nuclear reaction vector of truth that forces the light into the darkness. Yeah, my friends, that's who we are. That's what we're all about. If you want to live free, if you want to be the land of home of the free and the brave, and you want to actually live up to your ideals, your responsibility as a citizen, then this is your platform. This is your ticket. This is how we, the people, turn the tables on tyranny, because no kings today, no kings tomorrow, no kings ever Onwards and upwards, America. Fight.